So imagine walking into a room of like 20 coworkers.
Oh boy.
Right. The music is just a little too loud, the ambient chatter is this literal wall of sound, and the small talk hovering around the buffet line is just nothing short of agonizing.
Pure torture.
Exactly. You're holding a lukewarm beverage and you need to leave an impression tonight that screams um highly competent, engaging communicator.
Because your potential new boss is there.
Yes, your potential new boss is there, people from other apartments are there, but how do you actually do that? Like, how do you project intelligence and charm without sounding totally desperate or worse, completely rehearsed?
It is, it's kind of the ultimate modern social puzzle, isn't it? We spend all this time acquiring hard skills, but when we're thrown into a room and forced to actually converse, a lot of us we just freeze,
We just completely freeze.
or we default to talking about the weather, which gets you nowhere.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is so crucial. Welcome in, everyone. Today we are undertaking a very specific mission for you. Both of us are putting on our expert language coach hats.
Thinking exactly like IELTS examiners today.
Exactly. But we are applying that rigorous kind of microscopic linguistic lens to real-world survival.
Because, honestly, the criteria used to score a top-tier candidate in a high-stakes language exam, those are the exact same mechanics that make someone incredibly charismatic in a corporate boardroom.
Or on a first date, or at one of those terrifying networking events.
Exactly. Good communication is universal.
So our source material today is an exceptionally strong speaking sample. It's a descriptive narrative from a candidate talking about a company gathering, and it comes alongside this fascinating set of analytical notes that break down the psychology of social interactions.
Yeah, the notes are incredible. We're going to dissect the exact structural and um, lexical strategies that make an interaction not just memorable, but genuinely profound.
So we'll be breaking down the whole architecture of a compelling narrative. We're going to look at how to deploy advanced phrasing, specifically what it actually means to build on ideas rather than
I was
just...
waiting for your turn to speak.
Right, and the psychological weight behind describing an interaction as intellectually stimulating.
It's a heavy phrase, but it does so much work.
It really does. We're also going to look at how you structure a story to move from that agonizing, mundane small talk all the way to deep, profound tech trends, without giving your listener conversational whiplash.
Which is a real danger if you pivot too fast.
For sure. And finally, we'll tackle the ultimate abstract question our source is present, which is, why are deep conversations getting so much harder to find in the modern world? And I guess, what can we actually do about it?
It's a massive agenda today, but it all starts with the foundation. The way you open a narrative dictates whether the listener tunes in or just totally zones out.
Yeah, let's look at the core information from our source regarding the setup. So the speaker introduces their scenario. They call it a company gathering.
But they don't stop there.
No, they don't. They specify it as a small year-end party organized by my department. They specifically mention there were around 20 colleagues, and they note that they were introduced to someone from another team who happened to work in a technical role, and that they ended up sitting next to each other.
So if we put on our coaching hats for a second, we have to look at the mechanics of why this simple, highly specific background is so fiercely effective.
Right, because it sounds so basic at first glance.
It does, but it entirely grounds the listener. If you're an examiner who has listened to like 40 candidates that day, or even if you're just a friend listening to a story over coffee, your brain requires a container for the narrative.
I always think of it like setting the lighting in a movie scene.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because it's not just about aesthetics, right? It's about cognitive load. When a director sets the lighting, they're providing these cognitive anchors for the audience.
They're answering all the subconscious questions.
Exactly. Like, where are we? What time is it? What's the mood? And they do that so the audience's brain doesn't have to waste processing power figuring it out.
That is a crucial distinction. The concept of cognitive load is just paramount in communication. If our speaker just said, oh, I had a great conversation about artificial intelligence at a party.
The listener's brain is instantly cluttered with unanswered variables.
Exactly. What kind of party? Was it a college frat party?
Uh-huh.
A formal gala? A kid's birthday?
Right.
By specifying a small year-end party, 20 colleagues, and another team, the speaker builds the set immediately. They basically eliminate the ghost room in the listener's mind.
So now the listener has 100% of their cognitive bandwidth available to focus on the complex ideas the speaker is about to introduce.
Yes. And that phrase, 20 colleagues, It does so much heavy lifting there.
It's such a specific number.
It really is. It tells you immediately that this isn't a massive corporate retreat in a hotel ballroom where you have to shout over cover band.
Oh, I hate those.
Right. But it's also not an intimate dinner with 3 of your closest friends where deep talk is just a given. It establishes this awkward middle ground professional environment.
And that is a highly calculated strategic move. By establishing that this is a relatively mundane, standard corporate dinner, the speaker is deliberately lowering the expectations of the environment.
Think about the sociology of a department year-end party. What is the expected script there?
Well, you expect complaints about the new software system, maybe some gossip about upper management, and definitely a debate about the catering.
Yeah, the chicken is always dry.
Always. Basically, you expect a baseline of polite boredom.
Exactly. The baseline is polite boredom. So when the speaker later executes this sudden pivot to a profound, intellectually stimulating discussion about the future of technology.
It creates this massive, powerful contrast.
Yes. The mundane setting elevates the profound conversation. It's a classic narrative technique. You don't start the story with fireworks. You start with a gray sky, so the fireworks actually pop.
This is such a critical lesson for anyone trying to tell a compelling story, whether you're, going for a language score or just trying to hold court at a dinner table. Don't rush to the climax. Establish the gray sky.
But that brings us to a mechanical problem, doesn't it?
It does. How do you actually transition from the gray sky to the fireworks? Because you can't just sit down next to a stranger from the IT department and immediately demand, hey, tell me your thoughts on the future of human automation.
If you do that, you're going to trigger their fight or flight response.
Absolutely. It totally violates the social contract of the 20-colleague environment.
Right. So let's look at the pacing in the source material to see how this transition or this pivot is actually executed. The speaker notes that the conversation started with daily responsibilities and how our teams handled projects. Very safe.
Yeah.
Then comes the pivot. The Thor says, as we moved beyond work, they began sharing perspectives on how the tech industry is evolving.
And from there, the conversation expands into the rapid development of artificial intelligence and how it might reshape future roles.
And then, and this is key, they bring the entire abstract concept back down to earth with a discussion on maintaining work-life balance.
Okay, I want to challenge this strategy directly for a second.
Go for it.
Put yourself in the shoes of someone preparing for a high-pressure interview or an IELTS exam. Isn't bringing up a topic like artificial intelligence incredibly risky?
How so?
Well, if the candidate doesn't know what a neural network is, or if they lack the specialized vocabulary for machine learning algorithms, aren't they going to freeze the second the examiner asks a follow-up question?
It's a valid fear.
Wouldn't a safer strategy be to just talk about, I don't know, a new office policy?
It is a valid fear. And it is precisely why so many people get stuck in the gray sky of small talk forever.
Yeah.
They believe that to discuss a complex topic, they have to possess this encyclopedic technical mastery of that topic.
Right.
But look microscopically at the phrasing used in our source text. The speaker does not claim they discussed the mechanics of AI. They state they were sharing perspectives on how the tech industry is evolving and how AI might reshape roles.
Perspectives. And reshaping roles, that is the linguistic loophole, isn't it?
It is a massive loophole. They've taken a highly technical, potentially hazardous topic and fundamentally shifted the domain. They moved it from a computer science exam to a sociological observation.
That's brilliant.
You don't need a degree in data science to possess a perspective on how automation creates anxiety in the workforce. You are discussing the human reaction to the technology, not the technology itself.
And the cherry on top is the addition of work-life balance.
Precisely. Because what is more universally relatable than the struggle to disconnect from work? By ending the conversational funnel on work-life balance, the speaker perfectly grounds a highly abstract, intimidating concept into a profoundly human shared experience.
I love that you called it a conversational funnel. Let's break down this funnel because it's a blueprint you can use literally anywhere.
It really is.
You start with the handshake protocol, like in computing, right? Computers send a simple, low-stakes signal to each other just to establish a connection before sending heavy data.
Exactly.
Human small talk is our handshake protocol. Daily responsibilities. What projects are your team handling? It's safe, zero-friction agreement.
And once the connection is stable, then you introduce the broad abstraction, the tech industry evolving.
Right.
Then you introduce the deep end specific, artificial intelligence. But before you drown in the deep end, you immediately touch the bottom of the pool by pivoting to human impact. reshaping roles and work-life balance.
It's a defensive speaking strategy that looks like an offensive masterpiece.
Yeah.
You're controlling the depth of the pool the entire time while appearing incredibly sophisticated to your listener.
Sophistication is the perfect word here, which actually transitions us beautifully into how the speaker describes the feeling of this interaction.
Yeah, because it's not enough to simply recount the funnel.
No, the vocabulary you choose to evaluate the event dictates how the examiner or your conversational partner values your intellect.
So let's dive into the lexical resource side of this. For the lay listener who isn't drowning in exam rubrics, what exactly do we mean by lexical resource? Because to a lot of people, it sounds like just swallowing a thesaurus and spitting out big words.
Yeah, and a lot of people mistake it for exactly that. They think if they use the word plethora instead of a lot, they are demonstrating lexical resource.
Right, like, a plethora of AI.
Exactly. But true lexical resource, especially at the highest scoring bands, is about breadth, accuracy, and above all, flexibility. It's the ability to use language to convey subtle nuances of meaning, particularly regarding internal abstract states.
So it's not just big words, it's the right words for complex, invisible things.
Exactly. Let's look at the core information. The speaker describes the conversation as intellectually stimulating. They note the other person was thoughtful and open-minded,
Okay.
but the absolute crown jewel of the source text is this phrasing right here. Instead of trying to dominate the discussion, they genuinely listened and built on ideas, making it a dialogue rather than a debate.
Built on ideas, that is such a vivid structural phrase. And the source specifically contrasts this with the definition of a bad conversation, which is simply waiting for their turn to speak.
This contrast is the heart of human connection. The difference between waiting for your turn to speak and building on ideas is the difference between a zero-sum game and a collaborative architecture.
It totally makes me think of playing conversational ping pong.
Oh, say more about that.
You know, you're at a party, someone is talking about their recent vacation, and you aren't actually listening to a word they're saying. You are just mentally rehearsing your own story about your trip to Italy, waiting for a micropause so you can jump in and smack the ball back.
The ping pong analogy works to a point, but let's take it a step further. What is the actual objective in a game of ping pong? You're standing on opposite sides of a table, hitting the ball back and forth, but your ultimate goal is to hit it in a way that makes the other person miss.
You want to win the point.
Wow, yes. You want to terminate the rally on your terms.
Exactly. That perfectly aligns with the source text's phrase, trying to dominate the discussion. A debate is designed to find a loser. Conversational ping pong is about scoring points with your own cleverness.
But building on ideas, that is a completely different mechanism.
That is more like sitting on the floor with someone and playing with Lego bricks.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like you put down a red brick, which is an idea about AI. I don't look at your red brick and try to smash it, and I don't throw a green brick at your head to prove I have bricks too.
Right.
I look at your red brick, I process its shape, and I take a blue brick and click it right on top of yours to see how they fit.
And then they add a yellow brick. And suddenly, you are constructing an architecture of thought that neither of you could have built alone. The structure only exists because of the synthesis of your two minds.
It's the literal definition of a dialogue rather than a debate.
And when you walk away from that table, you have a structure in your mind that didn't exist before you sat down at that casual year-end dinner. That is what makes it intellectually stimulating.
The Lego analogy highlights exactly why this language scores so highly, both on an exam and just in social capital. By using terms like intellectually stimulating and analyzing the dynamic as building on ideas, the speaker is demonstrating advanced metacognition.
Let's unpack metacognition for the listener, because that is a heavy psychological term.
It is. Metacognition is, simply put, thinking about thinking. It is the awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes.
Right. When a speaker says, the party was fun, they are describing an external environment. When they say, he talked about AI, they are recounting a factual event.
But when they say, I found the conversation intellectually stimulating,
they are analyzing their own cognitive response to the event. They're proving that they don't just exist in the world like a recording device. They actively process and evaluate the world.
Yes. And in psychology, there's a concept known as shared reality. When you describe a conversation using metacognitive language like acknowledging the open-mindedness, the lack of domination, you signal to the examiner or your boss or your date that you understand the invisible mechanics of human respect.
You create a shared reality where the listener feels safe because they realize you're highly socially aware.
It's the difference between saying the food was good and the chef's use of acidity perfectly cut through the richness of the dish.
One is a basic observation,
And the other is an analysis of the underlying mechanics.
which is exactly what separates an average communicator from an exceptional one. It is the ability to articulate the why behind the feeling.
Right. And this specific interaction at the company party, this beautiful Lego-building, non-dominating dialogue, it serves as a perfect microcosm. It forces us to zoom out and look at the broader analytical notes in our sources regarding the psychology of engaging with strangers.
Because the source material doesn't just hand us a narrative. It demands we analyze the broader social phenomena underpinning that narrative.
The source asks a very direct question. Why do some people enjoy talking to strangers at social events?
And the answer provided is that it gives an opportunity to encounter new perspectives and experiences. It notes that unlike conversations with close friends, unfamiliar people have different backgrounds, industries, or ways of thinking, which makes the discussion refreshing.
What is mechanically happening in that answer? Look at the structure of the argument.
They are using a direct comparison. They don't just say strangers are good. They say strangers are good because they are not close friends.
That is the contrast method, and it is an indispensable grammatical and logical strategy for answering abstract questions. The human brain understands the world through contrast. Hot only makes sense because of cold. Light only makes sense because of dark.
If you just say strangers provide new perspectives, it feels a bit cliche. It's true, but it lacks emotional weight. But when you introduce close friends into the sentence, you establish a known baseline.
My close friends and I, we essentially share a brain ecosystem. We consume the same media, we have similar backgrounds, we complain about the same structural issues.
It is deeply comfortable, but it is an echo chamber.
And an echo chamber, by definition, does not require you to build new Lego structures.
The source brilliantly highlights this. By contrasting the comfort of friends with the different industries or ways of thinking of strangers, the speaker provides a multi-dimensional answer. They're saying, I understand the value of intimacy, but conversely, I understand the necessity of novelty.
Using grammatical tools of contrast words, like whereas, conversely, unlike it, it just demonstrates high-level logical organization.
I want to zero in on a very specific detail the source uses to illustrate this point because I find it fascinating.
What's that?
When discussing the necessity of social skills in the workplace, the source explicitly singles out tech workers. It says, even in technical industries, people rarely work entirely alone. Employees often need to collaborate across teams.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
As a coach, why do you think this specific example, the tech worker, is deployed here?
Well, because it is a surgical strike against a global stereotype, which is the ultimate way to demonstrate critical thinking. What is the prevailing myth of the technical worker?
The lone wolf coder.
Exactly. They wear noise-canceling headphones, they sit in a dimly lit room staring at cascading green code like in the Matrix, and they do not speak to another carbon-based life form unless the Wi-Fi goes down.
Exactly. So if an examiner asks, are communication skills important in the workplace? The lazy, low-scoring answer is yes. Salespeople need to talk to customers, and teachers need to talk to students.
That is merely stating the obvious. It requires zero critical thought.
But by choosing the least obviously social profession, the software engineer, and proving that even they rely on advanced communication, you make an airtight, sophisticated argument. If you can prove the exception, you prove the rule.
Furthermore, it shows that the speaker is actually in touch with the reality of the modern corporate world. The solitary coder is largely a myth today.
Completely. The tech industry runs on agile frameworks, daily stand-up meetings, cross-functional sprints, and constant code reviews.
If a developer cannot clearly communicate the logic of their code to a product manager who has no technical background, the entire project stalls.
The source specifically notes that strong communication is required to reduce misunderstandings. In complex technical environments, a misunderstanding isn't just an awkward moment. It's a multi-million-dollar bug in the software.
By identifying the tech worker as a collaborative entity, the candidate proves they understand that the modern professional world is a profoundly interconnected ecosystem.
But here's the paradox.
Okay, hit me.
If communicating across teams is so essential, and talking to strangers provides such refreshing, intellectually stimulating perspectives, why are we all so utterly terrified of it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Why do so many people struggle with this exact scenario? This brings us to a deeply empathetic portion of our source notes. the introvert's dilemma, and navigating social anxiety.
This section of the source material is vital because it moves away from judgment and into physiological and sociological observation. Let's read the core information.
Go for it.
The source asks why people find it difficult to join conversations at parties. It identifies the root cause as social anxiety or fear of being judged. It notes that people worry about saying something awkward or simply not knowing how to continue the flow.
Very relatable.
And crucially, it points out that if an environment is loud or fast-paced, it becomes incredibly difficult for introverted people to participate.
Notice where the source places the blame for the difficulty.
It places a lot of it on the environment itself, loud or fast-paced.
Often, society treats introversion or social anxiety as a personal defect. We tell people they need to put themselves out there or speak up, implying that their hesitation is a lack of courage.
Right, like it's a moral failing.
But the source acknowledges the architecture of modern social events. The sheer volume, the speed of interaction, the competitive nature of group dynamics is inherently hostile to certain nervous systems.
Let's look at the biology of that for a second. When you walk into that loud year-end party with 20 colleagues, your brain isn't just processing a networking opportunity, it is processing a massive influx of sensory data.
Right, and if you have an introverted disposition, your sensory gating functions differently. The loud music, the overlapping conversations, the unpredictable movements of people, your amygdala can interpret that sheer volume of unpredictability as a threat.
And when the amygdala senses a threat, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. Cortisol levels rise.
And what happens when cortisol floods the brain?
The prefrontal cortex, the exact part of the brain responsible for high-level language generation, metacognition, and Lego building, essentially powers down.
Which is why you freeze. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is a physiological bottleneck caused by the environment.
Okay, that empathy is incredibly validating. It is nice to know I'm not broken, the room is just loud.
Right?
But let me advocate for the listener here. If you or I have to go to one of these terrifying corporate events tomorrow night, validation doesn't help me survive the cocktail hour. How do I actually navigate a room that is actively shutting down my prefrontal cortex?
The tactical solution is actually hidden right back in our original narrative from the speaking sample. Look at what the speaker did.
They didn't stand in the middle of the room and try to command the attention of all 20 colleagues.
No, they didn't try to shout over the music. They found one person from another team. They sat down next to them, and they engaged in a localized two-person conversation.
They shrank the room.
Exactly. This is the ultimate strategy for navigating social anxiety in loud environments. You do not have to conquer the entire ecosystem. You just have to shrink your immediate environment down to a manageable cognitive load.
By sitting down with one person, you isolate one voice. You eliminate the unpredictability of a group dynamic where you never know who is going to speak next. You lower the cortisol, which allows your prefrontal cortex to boot back up.
And you combine that physical strategy of shrinking the room with the conversational strategy we discussed earlier, the handshake protocol.
You start with the safest, lowest stakes topic possible.
What team are you on? What are your daily responsibilities?
It's a script. You don't have to be spontaneous or charismatic to run the script.
You run the script until the physiological anxiety settles, until the connection is stable. And then once the environment feels safe, you execute the pivot toward a shared curiosity.
Shrink the room, run the script, execute the pivot. That is an incredibly practical toolkit, but the source material pushes us to consider something even larger.
Oh, definitely.
This idea of a fast-paced, loud environment where it is difficult to connect. It isn't just a description of a bad office party, it feels like a diagnosis of modern society as a whole.
We have arrived at the final, most complex phase of our analysis. In the context of an exam, this is the Part 3 final boss question. It tests whether a candidate can handle massive sociological abstractions.
The source tackles this exact question. Do meaningful conversations become more difficult nowadays? And it provides a very specific, nuanced argument. It argues, yes, to some extent.
To some extent.
It states that modern communication is faster and more fragmented due to social media and short-form content. As a result, many conversations remain superficial. However, it adds a vital caveat. Meaningful discussions are still possible if people are genuinely curious and engaged.
Let's break down the mechanics of this answer, because it is flawless. First, notice the initial phrasing. To some extent.
It's a safety net.
It is a marker of intellectual maturity. A low-scoring response deals in absolutes. Yes, technology has destroyed all human connection, or no, everything is perfectly fine.
By saying, to some extent, you acknowledge complexity. You allow yourself to explore a negative trend without painting yourself into a corner of doom.
Let's explore the diagnosis they provide. Faster and more fragmented due to social media and short-form content. We need an analogy to understand how fragmentation actively prevents depth. Because it's not just about screen time. It's about what the screens are doing to our conversational stamina.
How would you conceptualize it?
Well, how would you?
I would call it conversational inflation.
Conversational inflation. I like the sound of that. Unpack the economics of it for us.
So think about inflation in an economy. If you print $1 trillion, the value of a single dollar plummets because there is simply too much of it. The currency loses its purchasing power.
Right.
Social media and short-form content have done this to human interaction. We are consuming thousands of micro-interactions a day. A 15-second video, a quick text, a like on a photo, a brief comment. We are flooded with a massive volume of low-effort communication.
We have printed 1 trillion micro-interactions.
Exactly. And because the sheer volume is so high, the value of the currency, our attention, plummets. We become conditioned to the 15-second dopamine hit. We expect a payoff immediately. But a meaningful conversation like building a complex Lego structure about AI and work-life balance does not yield a dopamine payoff in 15 seconds.
It requires an investment of sustained attention. It requires sitting in the gray sky of the handshake protocol until you find the rhythm.
And conversational inflation has robbed us of the patience required to make that investment. We've lost our conversational purchasing power. We just want the quick hit, which leads directly to the superficiality the source mentions.
That analogy perfectly captures the systemic issue. And there's a sociological layer to this as well regarding turn-taking. Sociological studies on conversational dynamics show that technology trains us in asynchronous communication. You send a message, you wait. They send a message, they wait.
It's broadcasting.
Yes. What is the primary action on a social media platform? You post a status, you post a photo. You are serving the ball into the void, hoping for a reaction. You are literally dominating the discussion because you own the real estate of the post. It is entirely centered on the self.
You aren't building on ideas. You are shouting your own ideas into a megaphone and counting how many people applaud.
The digital environment actively trains us to play ping pong, and it aggressively discourages the genuine listening required for dialogue. It trains us to view other people not as collaborators in a shared reality, but as an audience for our personal broadcasts.
So the modern digital world is essentially one giant, deafening, fast-paced networking event that is actively degrading our prefrontal cortex and preventing us from sitting down and having a real dialogue.
That is a terrifying diagnosis.
It is grim, which is precisely why the source's conclusion, the caveat, is so structurally and philosophically important.
The caveat states, meaningful discussions are still possible when people are genuinely curious and willing to engage more deeply with each other's ideas and experiences.
The speaker does not just diagnose the disease. They offer the antidote. And the antidote is human agency.
This is such a powerful strategy for answering any broad, depressing societal question. When you are faced with a massive, abstract, seemingly unsolvable trend like the algorithmic fragmentation of human attention, always bring your conclusion back to the individual. Bring it back to human mechanics.
The technology is fragmented, the environment is loud, but human curiosity remains a choice. By emphasizing genuinely curious, the speaker reclaims power from the algorithm. They are arguing that despite the systemic conditioning towards superficiality, an individual can make a conscious, rebellious choice to engage deeply.
It is a message of profound hope disguised as the language exam answer. You aren't doomed by the conversational inflation of the modern world. You just have to consciously choose to be curious when you sit down next to a stranger at a dinner party.
Ending a complex analysis on a note of human agency is flawless execution. It demonstrates to the listener that you comprehend the macro-level systemic problem, but you also understand micro-level personal responsibility.
It is a perfectly balanced, deeply mature perspective.
So let's step back and synthesize this journey. We started with a very simple narrative about a company gathering and some brief notes on social dynamics, and we have excavated a massive architectural blueprint for human connection.
We examined the necessity of the setup, how specific, low-stakes details, 20 colleagues, a department party act as cognitive anchors. They lower the listener's cognitive load and establish a baseline of mundane expectations so that the profound moments actually register.
We analyze the mechanics of the pivot, How to safely transition from the gray sky of the handshake protocol into the deep waters of complex issues by focusing on perspectives and human impact rather than getting trapped in technical mechanics.
We redefine a lexical resource not as a memorized list of big words, but as the precision to describe internal states. We learned that metacognitive phrases like intellectually stimulating and structural metaphors like building on ideas signal to the listener that you are capable of creating a shared collaborative reality.
Rather than just playing a zero-sum game of conversational ping pong.
Yeah.
We explored the grammar of the contrast method, using the difference between close friends and strangers to prove the value of new perspectives. We debunk the myth of the solitary tech worker to demonstrate critical thinking about modern collaborative environments.
We looked at the physiological reality of the introvert's dilemma, understanding how loud environments trigger the sympathetic nervous system, and we provided the tactical solution. Shrink the room, isolate the variables, and run the script until the prefrontal cortex comes back online.
And finally, we tackled the modern crisis of conversational inflation, diagnosing how short-form broadcasting degrades our attention, but ultimately realizing that genuine, localized curiosity is the antidote.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from our deep dive today.
It's a line straight from the source material that perfectly encapsulates why we bother doing this at all. The speaker reflects that the interaction reminded me how valuable spontaneous conversations can be.
Spontaneous conversations, not scheduled Zoom meetings, not curated asynchronous social media posts. Just two nervous systems brought together by sheer geographical chance, choosing to engage.
Even in the most awkward, forced, unlikely settings, a mandatory corporate year-end dinner, profound, intellectually stimulating connections are just waiting to happen. The raw materials for a great conversation are always present in the room. You just have to decide to build the structure.
You have to choose to pick up the first Lego brick.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our time together, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something that builds on the sociology and the linguistics we've analyzed today, but perhaps reframes it entirely.
Consider the fragmented inflationary communication landscape we just discussed.
We spent a lot of time analyzing how the architecture of the modern digital world is actively training our brains to be superficial. It trains us to broadcast rather than listen. It conditions us toward isolation, but masquerades as connection.
It is a systemic conditioning that devalues our attention span.
So here is the thought we want to leave you with. If the entire machinery of the modern world is designed to shorten your attention span, to make your interactions transactional, and to keep you addicted to superficial broadcasting, could the simple act of choosing to sit down with a stranger, consciously resisting the urge to check your phone when there is a lull in the dialogue, and deliberately choosing to build on their ideas rather than dominating the space, could that be the most radical form of rebellion we have left?
It's a profound reframe. Is a deep conversation just a chat? Or is it an active, deliberate resistance against the fragmentation of human society?
Is truly patiently listening to another human being the ultimate act of reclaiming our humanity? Something to deeply ponder the next time you find yourself sitting next to someone from another team at a seemingly boring casual dinner. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.